Ken Scott woke up early on January 7, 2020, ready for an adventure. He had just heard on the radio that the nearby Silver Mountain Resort had received 1.5 feet of fresh snow. As a self-confessed ski addict who had worked in the ski industry for 30 years, he knew he couldn't miss this opportunity. Even at 55, he still skied 100 days a year. His wife, Ruth, also loved skiing, but she had other plans, so he set off alone. Scott was on his way to Silver Mountain when he ran into his old friend Rebecca Hurlen-Patano. She, like Scott, was a veteran skier and had spent more than 2 decades on these slopes. "Can you believe it? 16 inches. Are you ready?" Rebecca exclaimed as they changed into their boots. Scott didn't need to answer. His excitement was written all over his face. He was ready for the fresh powder and couldn't wait to hit the slopes. Scott and Rebecca spent the next hour skiing together, making fresh tracks and bantering as they tackled the steep runs. As they were heading up in the lift, they noticed that the 6,200-foot Wardner Peak was now open. The peak was home to the challenging expert-level trail named 16-1, which had been closed all season over concerns of an avalanche. But that morning, patrols had set off explosive charges on the peak to clear loose snow, reducing the chance of a snowslide. "What do you think?" Rebecca asked Scott. "Let's go for it," he replied, full of excitement. As they traversed through deep snow and trees, they recognized other Silver Mountain regulars heading for the run. They waved to Warren Kays, Bill Fusak, and Carl Humphreys. Everyone was excited to be the first this season to ski the steep, powder-rich run. When they reached the slope's crest, Rebecca looked back at Scott with excitement. The huge, toothy grin on his bearded face was all the encouragement she needed. But as she pointed her skis downhill and took off, the snow beneath her gave way, causing an avalanche. Rebecca yelled out "Avalanche" with fear in her voice. Both were pummeled by heavy slabs of snow that carried them about 500 feet down the mountain. Rebecca felt it enclose her, moving quickly up her back and over her shoulders, then heavy against her neck. Snow filled the space in front of her and piled up around her thighs. She was engulfed. Scott was caught off guard as the avalanche swept him downhill. His years of experience as a ski patrol member came flooding back as he remembered the survival techniques he had learned. Keep your head up, try to swim, stay on top of the snow. But it was no use. The snow was too powerful, and he felt like a load of clothes in a dryer as it tumbled him around. When he finally came to a stop, he was lying on his left side, almost completely buried with his skis and poles still attached. But through the foot of snow on top of him, he could see daylight and managed to move his right hand and forearm. Clearing the snow from his face, he reassured himself. It's a shallow burial. Rebecca had also been caught in the avalanche, but unlike Scott, she had ended up partially buried in a tight squatting position. She quickly scooped the snow away and managed to pull herself out. Her rescue training kicked in, and she immediately looked uphill to where she had last seen Scott, calling out his name. She was relieved when his pole poked through the snow in response, indicating he was about 10 feet away. She also called out to fellow skiers Fusak and Kays, who were farther down the slope, but thankfully they were able to respond to her. However, she had no idea where Humphreys was. Scott couldn't move much under the weight of the snow, but he felt confident as Rebecca now knew where he was located, and rescue was just a matter of waiting. With his free right hand, he cleared about 1.5 feet of snow above his face for breathing room. He knew how crucial this was, as breathing his exhaled carbon dioxide for too long would be poisonous. Following the techniques he had learned back at ski patrol, he focused on oxygenating, taking small breaths to conserve oxygen, thinking positive thoughts, and staying calm. As adrenaline coursed through her body, Rebecca knew she had to reach the other skiers and uncover them quickly. She kept repeating the thoughts that kept her focused. We are alive. Be fast. Stay in control. The sound of the avalanche still ringing in her ears, Rebecca rushed to help Fusak, who was buried up to his neck. Just as she was about to pull him out, the air around her exploded with the sound of another, much larger avalanche. She was slammed in the back by a wall of snow and tossed another 20 feet downhill. When she emerged, she found the landscape completely transformed and her friends nowhere to be found. Scott, too, heard the roar of the second avalanche and knew he was in danger. As the snow piled on top of him, his world went completely black and silent. He was trapped, immobile, and unable to take a full breath. He gasped for small gulps of air, knowing that time was running out. Rebecca frantically searched for her friends, but the snow had covered all traces of them. The reality of the situation hit her. Her friends had been buried alive. As she struggled to come to terms with the possibility of their deaths, she knew she had to act fast to save them. Scott lay trapped, unable to move, but refusing to give up hope. He knew that rescue was his only chance of survival. He focused on taking small breaths, conserving oxygen, and thinking positive thoughts. He was determined to make it out alive. With the clock ticking, Rebecca knew she had to act fast to save her friends. She pushed through the fear and focused on her training, knowing that it was their only chance of survival. She knew that every second counted, and she couldn't give up. As Scott lay trapped beneath the snow, he knew he had to act fast to increase his chances of survival. He closed his eyes and mentally ran through a checklist of everything he was still wearing from head to toe. He knew that if rescuers couldn't see any surface markers, it would be difficult for them to find him. He thought about his friend Rebecca, wondering if she was okay or if she was buried too. She was the only person who knew where they had been skiing and could help locate him. Scott knew that the clock was ticking and his chances of survival were slim. He tried to fight back panic, but when he thought of his wife and daughter, he felt helpless and doomed. He knew that panicking would only use up valuable air, and he let out a scream that no one would hear. Meanwhile, Rebecca quickly unzipped her parka and pulled out her phone. She called her friend Ernie Silva, who was a ski patrol staffer and a friend of Scott's. "Hey Rebecca, long time no hear," Ernie answered. Rebecca cut him off. "There's been an avalanche on 16-1 and Scott is in it." She knew that time was of the essence, and every second counted in the race to find and save her friends trapped beneath the snow. The word of the avalanche spread quickly, and soon Silver Mountain's patrols and skiers were headed to the avalanche site with shovels and 10-foot poles, ready to probe for buried skiers. Rebecca, alone on the mountainside, used her gloved hands to dig frantically at the hard-packed snow. Her friends' lives depended on her. Scott, encased in the avalanche, drifted between terror and panic. His rib cage compressed. He could take only tiny breaths. He fought to stay positive by focusing on his breathing. But as he tried to move his head or a finger and couldn't, he panicked again. With so much more snow on top of him, he feared ski patrols wouldn't be able to locate him. His time was ticking away. 10 minutes after the second avalanche, the slope was abuzz with some 50 rescuers, including red-coated ski patrols as well as volunteer skiers. Rebecca, like a commander marshaling her troops, stayed calm and pointed out where she thought her friends were buried. Rescuers formed a horizontal line along the slope, each standing just 2 feet apart, and inserted their probes down into the deep, chunky snow, hoping to hit and locate the buried skiers. 40 minutes into the search, a rescuer shouted, "A strike!" Bill Fusak, unconscious but alive, was dug out of more than 9 feet of snow. Seeing his location, Rebecca had a better idea of where Scott might be buried. She pointed to a spot some 10 feet farther up and, pumped with adrenaline, screamed at the rescuers, "There! Move there! Faster!" Scott lay buried in the snow, feeling the cold seep into his bones. He had given up hope of survival and was resigned to his fate. But then, a warmth spread through his body, signaling the onset of hypothermia. He thought to himself, "I'll be asleep soon, and this will all be over." Just when he thought it was the end, he felt a slight pressure on his hip. Could it be a rescue probe? He held his breath and waited for it to come again, but it never did. Rescuers must have moved on, he thought, and his 1 in a million chance was gone. But then, a new sensation, vibrations and the sound of shovels hitting snow. He started shouting, hoping someone would hear him. It was like a miracle. After 5 minutes of digging, rescuers uncovered Scott's face. He couldn't believe it. He had survived 2 avalanches. As he was pulled out, he saw Rebecca among the rescuers. He pulled her down on top of him, almost squeezing the breath out of her. She told him to let go, that they needed to get him help. But he couldn't let go. He was just too happy to be alive. Though Scott and his friends Warren Kays and Bill Fusak had survived, 3 others, including Carl Humphreys, had not. Scott suffered no major injuries, but he and Rebecca had to deal with post-traumatic stress syndrome and received counseling. Despite the tragic loss of life, Scott's love of skiing remained undiminished, and just 9 days after his rescue, he was back on the slopes at Silver Mountain. Thank you for watching. If you thought this video was interesting, you may also like some of the other videos available on our channel.